Good evening. Okay, so I come out of the drug abuse community, as you heard, and in that, you know, everybody holds hands, sings Kumbaya, and they go, you know, good evening. Everybody goes, good evening. So can we try that one more time? Good evening. Thank you. I'm addicted to that, so I needed it. I did some dithering, trying to think about what would be a good talk for tonight. And so what I'm going to do is try to speak sort of in general terms about what is the overall relationship between science and the rest of society, because in a job like mine, actually, that's what I do for a living. I am interested, I've always been interested, other than the fact that I can't keep a job and therefore have had these other jobs before. They all have been at the intersection of science and society, and I'm one of those people who believes that although individual scientists may do what they do because it's interesting and provocative and stimulates their little gray cells, the truth is that society only supports science because it's good for society, and the purpose of science is to serve society. So I thought I'd talk about that relationship because we've gone through a lot of changes. Let me start with a bit of truism, if I can make this work right. I'll start with this truism. Never in the history of humankind has that relationship been more important. And the main reason for that is that there is not an issue of modern society that doesn't have a science and technology component to it. And I won't read all of these to you, but you can see that they are the major issues facing humankind. And every one of those issues, whether it's poverty, education, renewable energy resources, international security, they all have a science component directly or indirectly, and therefore it's critical that the relationship between science and society is good. You cannot prosper in modern society unless you have at least a minimal amount of comfort and familiarity with science. At a minimum, you need to know what is science and isn't science. We're all exposed constantly to charlatans who try to cloak whatever their idea is in the mantle of science because they think it gives them credibility. Well, one has to be able to separate those things. And of course, there's a direct correlation between the strength of a country's scientific infrastructure and its economic, certainly, position in the world, but probably the quality of life of its people and the health of its citizens. And so we say not only do individuals need to have familiarity with science, but nations need to have science and technology components. And of course, the obverse is true. Science can't prosper unless the relationship is positive and the relationship is strong, because we only exist to serve society and we can't do our work without the support of society. And I made that myself for this talk. Would you like to see that again? That was a lot of work. You may think it was easy. It was not easy. Please admire it. Thank you. That is a roller coaster. So the relationship over time has varied. By and large, it has been good. But if you think about Galileo and people historically and even more recently, as I'll point out, the relationship has had a variety of tension points, and that's bad. As Charles Dickens would say, from a science and society point of view, we've been living in the best of times and the worst of times. I have to tell you a funny story about that. So I have the worst classical education of any person in the United States. But over time, I have given out a lot of money. I have been using this line for a very long time, but I used to say, as William Shakespeare said. Now, no, when you give out $1 billion a year, like at NIDA, nobody says to you, idiot, wrong. The minute I didn't have that money anymore, somebody went, psst. So we've been living in the best and the worst of times. And the truth is, we are, in fact, living in the best of scientific times. Advances in science are coming and have been coming at an unbelievable rate. The rate of sort of what we call incremental advances, science building on itself, have been phenomenal. And new technologies, the appearance of new technologies, whether it's molecular genetics or brain imaging or information and communication technology, are enabling what we think of as really big jumps, quantum jumps in the level of scientific understanding. And I had the wonderful opportunity to spend the afternoon here at IHMC, and I met with people doing, frankly, totally outlandish, fabulous things that you never could do if you didn't have this kind of technological expertise. And they are, of course, at the cutting edge, but it's cutting edge that has tremendous practical consequences. And I wouldn't be a scientist if I didn't throw some science in, so I'm going to pop through some stuff pretty rapidly. So everybody's heard about nanotechnology. It's actually nano everything. You got nanobiology, nanochemistry, nanomaterials. But the truth is, the ability to work at these nearly atomic level scales is changing the way we think about fundamental materials and what you can do with them, the way in which you can administer medicines, the way in which you can do a variety of diagnostic tests. That's an image of polycarbonate nanotubes, okay? And you'll note I publish Science magazine, so everything I use comes from science. But in fact, we declared this last year human genetic variation as the breakthrough of the year, the most important finding of the year. Well, why do we care about that? We care about understanding the genome not only because it's interesting to know about all your genes, but because it will herald what we hope will be a whole new age of what's called personalized medicine, where we can, in fact, target medicines to your particular disease, and knowing your genetic information will tell us, perhaps, how you will respond to a particular drug differently from how someone with a different genetic heritage would respond to the drug. The most commonly known one about that is the new treatments for breast cancer that are targeted towards the HER receptor that, in fact, responds, and it's genetically determined whether that's the form of cancer that you have, and whether you'll respond or not is dependent on your genetic makeup. And so personalized medicine, we are hoping, is going to come, but it's what's coming out of all of these genetic advances. None of you have ever heard of the Human Microbiome Project, have you? So microbes, right, them little bacteria and stuff, them little things that are running around inside of you. And in fact, there is a project now ongoing that will, in fact, try to characterize the microbial environment, the microbes present in humans. And the purpose of it is to, in fact, not only enable us to use them to form new alternative energy sources, but in fact to use them in a positive way and use microbes as a form of medicine. I'm just going through this fast. And of course, stem cell research that has become controversial in some domains, but there are all kinds of stem cells. Everybody knows about bone marrow transplants. Well, that's a transplant of adult stem cells. There's, of course, controversy around embryonic stem cell research. There also is this new induced pluripotent adult stem cells from skin cells that's been discovered recently, and we're very hopeful that that may develop into a new way. The reason we care about stem cells is they have the ability to develop into organ systems, into cell types. Pluripotent stem cells can develop into any of many, many, many different kinds of organs and hold great promise for diseases like diabetes and Parkinson's disease. So I just thought I'd throw a different one in. Ice on Mars, life on Mars. This is, in fact, from the Mars rover. The poor thing is stuck. If you've been reading the newspaper, I was at the Jet Propulsion Lab, maybe 6 months ago, and they were bragging about the rover, running around Mars. Bleep! stuck in the sand. But it has, in fact, revealed that there has been ice on Mars. Does it mean life on Mars? And then, of course, I'm a neuroscientist, a brain guy, and therefore no talk from me without some brain stuff. And the truth is that advances in technology have revolutionized fundamentally our understanding about the way the brain operates, but more importantly, its relationship to what we all think of as our mind. So I'm showing this just because I think it's really cool. Up until about 10 years ago, we thought that brains were fully developed at about age 12. And then, over the course of the last decade, we have learned, and these are MRI scans showing white matter in sort of that bluish, and then the green stuff and the red stuff is gray matter. So if you look at a 5-year-old on the left, right, you can see they don't have a whole lot of white matter there. And then over the course of adolescence towards young adulthood, they in fact develop white matter. That means over the course of adolescence, the brain is developing tremendously, and you'll notice it's particularly in this area called the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for impulse control. Now you may be saying to yourself, why is he making me listen to this? And the answer is, that's why a 12-year-old and an 18-year-old, if you have adolescents, you understand this perfectly, why they feel like different species from each other. And it's very interesting that you can, in fact, using modern brain imaging techniques, watch the different ways in which young adolescents and adult or older adolescents respond to a variety of things like rewards or impulse control. I know none of you have 12-year-olds who have problems with impulse control, or 14 or 16-year-olds. Anyway, I thought that was cool. And then, of course, since I come out of the drug abuse field, do you remember that famous ad from the Partnership for Drug-Free America? This, by the way, is the most famous ad ever. Got the award of the Advertising Council right after I tried to get them to pull the ad, because it's totally inaccurate from a scientific point of view. But it goes to show you how useful science is. But in fact, it's a tremendously well-known ad and totally inaccurate. Drugs are bad for you, don't get me wrong, but drugs do not, in fact, fry your brain. And in fact, that is not your brain on drugs. But that is your brain on drugs. And the advent of modern brain imaging techniques have allowed us to actually watch what's happening in the brain of a living, breathing, awake, behaving cocaine addict during a cocaine experience. And all you have to see, that's a brain, right? Top, bottom, left, right. You'll be a radiologist at the end of this talk. If you look at the top, you see the areas of the brain activated during the first part of a drug experience when the addict is feeling euphoria. And then as the drug wears off, he or she experiences craving, and different areas of the brain are activated. That is your brain on drugs, and the ability to see what's happening in the brain has changed the way we conceptualize drug addiction. And I won't go into it now, but we can talk about it later if you want. It's what's taught us that, in fact, addiction is a brain disease. It's expressed in the form of compulsive behavior, but it's a brain disease. It's a disease of the brain. Prolonged drug use changes the brain in fundamental and long-lasting ways that last long after the individual stops using drugs. And that matters not because it's interesting, but because it tells you why you can't just cut it out. And it is a myth, by the way, that you can just quit. I don't want to do it anymore. I'm a heroin addict for the last 30 years, and today I think I won't. Doesn't happen. And the reason that they can't is precisely because it's a brain disease, and we only know it's a brain disease because the science, the technology that can be applied, has taught us the nature of what's happening during the course of becoming an addict and being an addict over time. Okay, so that's the good news. Did you like the good news part? Positive feedback. I'm also a psychologist. We know about positive reinforcement, and we like it. Okay. I have no shame. All right. So on the one hand, science is going very well, but there are other things going on within the scientific enterprise that are not going so well. And these are things that are important because they undermine the relationship between science and the rest of society. You read about scientific misconduct in the newspaper, somebody fudging data, and although it may be a single event, after 1 million articles are published, it nicks, it tarnishes the credibility of science. Or these conflict of interest issues that have been coming up of late, sadly, particularly in my own field. And they undermine the credibility of science and, in fact, undermine that relationship between science and society. I'm pleased to tell you that the conflict issue is finally being addressed by particularly the biomedical science community and the National Institutes of Health. I highlight this because they're soliciting comments right now. And if you want to make comments, you can go to the website, which anybody can remember, nih.gov. It's not that hard. And because they're finalizing the regulations. But other groups as well, many of whom have been heavily involved in these issues, are addressing them simultaneously. The Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences just put out a report. I scanned this in yesterday, so it's not as pretty as the eventual cover, real cover will be, but they sent me a copy of it, and in fact, finally, the Institute of Medicine is, in fact, declaring principles, very stringent requirements for how to control conflict of interest, and the point is to do it in order to maintain the credibility of science and to maintain society's confidence that what science is telling us is, in fact, something to be attended to. So these are things internal to science. So first good news, then a little bit of bad news internally. But there are some external factors that are operating as well. The biggie, if you're a scientist, is always money. And we worry about money constantly and periodically whine about it, if you haven't heard us. And over the course of the last 5 years, the situation has been very bad and, in fact, very tight. And I won't go through this in detail, but if you look at that red line, the third line from the top, you'll see that over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, in constant dollars, in fact, U.S. support for research has actually fallen off a bit. And that's been a source of great dismay, partly because it's hard to maintain momentum, and particularly when other countries like China, Japan, are increasing their support for science, the European Commission. And so it's very difficult for the U.S. to maintain its preeminence in the face of that. But that seems to be changing, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. Am I talking too fast? Is this boring? No. Good. Anybody falls asleep, I throw this. Okay, but let me go back to the bigger sort of level issue of the relationship between science and the rest of society because of these points. That is, that for people to prosper, they need comfort at least with science and fundamental understanding of what science is. I don't think the truth is that not everybody needs to know the excruciating details of molecular biology. I would like it, but it's not critical. But you can't thrive in modern society if technology intimidates you totally. You just can't function in a labor force. Same for science to prosper. I said that before. And I wouldn't have gone through that if I don't think we have a problem. And the problem is that over the course of the last decade or so, there has been an increase in the tension in the relationship. And it's odd tension, because when you ask, do people like science? By and large, people say yes. And you don't have to read this in detail either. Actually, I'm the only person who can see it in detail, so I'll tell you whatever I want. But just look at the dark bluish gray and the gray, and you'll see since 1979, between 70 and 90% of Americans have said the benefits of science outweigh the risks. Science is good for you. And that's good. That means people like science. The problem is they have no idea what it is. So you can read, right? 60% of Americans believe in extrasensory perception. By the way. Astrology, not scientific. And 7% of Americans do not answer true to the statement that human beings developed from earlier species of animals. So they like science, but they sort of don't get it. And it matters for adults, but it actually matters more for children. The labor force of the future will be more and more technology-based. It's one of the reasons why so much of American industry, besides labor costs, the quality of the labor force in the United States has been deteriorating over time relative to some other countries, and therefore industries are moving offshore, moving to other places, and some of it is that the quality of their workforce is better. I believe that the biggest problem in science education in the United States is not the training of future scientists and engineers. We'll get future scientists and engineers. It's a wonderful life and a wonderful career, and scientists have a good time. But it's the general labor force. It's the general education we're giving to this nation's children that is lagging behind many other countries. And it's terrible because the future will only demand more familiarity and comfort. You have to be able to tolerate technological change, or you can't work in an industry where the technology is changing, whether it's auto manufacturing, computer manufacturing, or clothing manufacturing that uses technology that changes. If you're totally intimidated by it, you're at a terrible disadvantage. And when I give this speech, because I am obsessed with this issue, people often look at me like I'm crazy. Well, so this is a study called Pisa that was done across many, many countries. And so on the left, this is 15-year-olds' proficiency in science. If you look on the left, you have countries like Finland, Estonia, Hong Kong, Canada, Macau, Korea, Japan, Australia. So you get all the way down to where that arrow is before you get to the United States. That says that American children at age 15 in science are lagging behind all of those other countries like Poland, Belgium, Latvia. These are not countries we think of as scientific and technological whizzes of the world. And it's a cause, I think, of great concern. This is just another study done of science, and I won't keep harping on this other than to show you Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, all are ahead of us in science performance here in 8th grade math and science on top, math at the bottom. Slovenia, not a big science powerhouse. The reason is that we need to make sure our children are not stragglers in the age of technology. We want them to have the opportunities, and it's the responsibility, I believe, of parents and their grandparents. That's us. I have 2 grandchildren, one of whom is 3 weeks old. I have a video of the older one singing, if you would like, later. I'll show it to you. But we have a responsibility. He's really good. He's 2.5. Okay, you get the point. In addition to that, though, I also believe that a lot of this science society tension has been coming about because of conflicts between what science is showing and some other factors, some of which are straight out politics and economy. Those two things are always tied together, but others have to do with the encroachment on issues of core human values. And one of the things I have learned the hard way that really is unfortunate is, the purpose of science is to tell us about the nature of the natural world, whether we like the answer or not. You don't get to pick the answer and say, I don't like that answer. But the only people who are actually stuck with the answer are scientists. Because if normal people don't like the answer, there is no consequence if they say, nah, I don't believe it. Right? I'll give you an example in just a minute. And so it's been very hard for somebody like me who has spent most of his life in science to realize that, I go to a dinner party, somebody says, so what do you think about global warming? And I say, yeah, global warming. Say, I don't believe it. What do you mean you don't believe it? What does it mean you don't believe it? Anyway, so the example I'll give you is what we are now calling global climate disruption, because it's a better term than climate warming. It really is. And if you misbehave, I'll explain that to you. But I am an expert. I have some expertise. That is actually a picture of me at the South Pole. And I show it to you because it's my only credibility to talk about global warming. It was minus 50 degrees when that picture was taken. And as you can see, I was advertising our journal. Okay, so this is a very famous chart, but it actually is proof. It's as strong proof as you could have that the Earth is warming, not every year. See the little cycles? So last year might have been colder than this year. But if you look at the trend over the course of the last 120 years, it sure has been getting warmer all the time. Pretty hard to dispute it. 97% of the scientific community thinks that's true. I was at a dinner party recently. A friend of mine is a physicist. We had the conversation that people always have with me about global warming, and he said, it's not true. I did this, right? I gave him this speech. He said, I just don't believe it. Okay, this is a very interesting set of data from a guy named Lonnie Thompson at Ohio State that I think is very convincing. If you look on the left, you will see the Grinnell Glacier in 1910, then you can watch it in 1998. Or at the bottom, the Boulder Glacier in Glacier National Park, 1932 to 1988. The glaciers are going away. They are going away because of that earlier slide I showed you that my physicist friend doesn't believe. And then this is very interesting because this is an interesting chart. All you have to see is that in fact, what's happening is that not that there are more storms because of the climate change, but they're more severe. People in an area like this certainly can resonate to this. So it's not that there are more frequent storms. It's that the climate change is making the individual storms more dramatic, and therefore they're causing increased flooding. On the left in each of these is 1950, and on the right is the year 2000, and now the water. So you get the point. Why do people deny climate change? They deny it because it's incredibly inconvenient. It really is a pain in the neck. Because once you recognize that the climate is being disrupted, you have to do something about it. You really only have three choices. Prevention, right? Pretty tough to do. Adaptation, adapt to the climate change, move out of the area. Or suffering. Those are the three choices that you get. And it's very inconvenient and very expensive, and therefore many people have denied it, not for scientific reasons is my point, but because it conflicts with their political needs or with their economic concerns. And then there are this array of issues where science has more and more been abutting against or encroaching on core human values. So cloning and embryonic stem cell research is a classic example. And the disagreement has nothing to do with the science. It is not about the science. It's about when you believe life begins. It takes it out of the realm of science. Science has nothing to say about when life begins. And therefore, it becomes a values issue, but research is encroaching upon it. I put the personal topics in just because I think they're bizarre. But so there is a tremendous objection to, it seems, certainly in the U.S. Congress about a decade ago, came within 4 votes of defunding 4 NIH grants because they were studying human sexual behavior. It made the members of Congress uneasy. I wonder why. And the truth is those studies, some of which came from my institute, were about the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, which are not good for you, and HIV/AIDS, and selling sex for crack. These are issues of tremendous societal import. What, we're not going to study them because they make us uncomfortable? The point is that it's an encroachment on that. And then, of course, the whole issue about teaching evolution in the schools has been a very difficult and very controversial one, where there are people at both ends of the continuum, both what I call the extreme evangelical conservatives and the extreme evangelical atheists, who are in fact pitting science and religion against each other, when in fact science and religion should be living together quite comfortably, and there is no inherent battle between the two. We can talk about that more later too, if you'd like. But that's an issue where there's tension because of this relationship. And now I'm going to alert you to the next set that are going to come, because they're going to come from my field. And that is that as people understand more and more what neuroscience, the study of the brain, is telling us, they will understand that it doesn't conflict, it abuts against, it encroaches on some core values. For example, if I can look in your brain and watch your mind in action, it says your mind is there. That's where it is. It's in the mush, on the hard thing, in the hard thing on top of your shoulders. Well, what does that say about your sense of self, or your sense of mind or free will? By the way, apropos that, you can have a mind in the mush and still have free will. They are not mutually exclusive, but people who don't understand it are very threatened by anything that implies that there's a physical basis to behavior. We can talk about that too, but that raises a whole array of issues. And this unresolved conflict with values and with political expediency, I believe, is responsible for a lot of the tension that's going on between science and the rest of society. It's creating a divide that undermines both society's ability to benefit from the science and science's ability to benefit from and serve the rest of society. I come back to my earlier points. Either ignoring or distorting science does undermine the public's ability to use science, and therefore we have to find a way to get around this kind of attention, because otherwise both sides are compromised, and particularly future generations. So what do you do about it? Well, the traditional response of the scientific community has been to whine. And I, by the way, am the official U.S. whiner on behalf of science. As the head of the largest general scientific society in the world, I'm the guy who, when somebody compromises the integrity of science, I stand up and I go, oh, don't do that. And the truth is, it's ridiculous to do that. That is not a productive response. It makes me feel good, and it makes our membership pays me to do that. But it's not effective, and as I think Pogo once said, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome is the definition of insanity. I used to run the National Institute of Mental Health. I should know better. And so I and a number of other people have been advocating a different strategy. We call a more assertive strategy, and that is to go out to the public in a different way and not do what the scientific community has always done. What the scientific community has always done is to say it's because they don't understand it, right? And therefore we'll go out and we'll just tell them poor people, and then they'll get it, and then they'll agree with us. Well, we've learned by now that not all those issues are. We can't just educate ourselves out of it because they don't come from a lack of understanding. That was a point I was trying to make about stem cells. It's not that people don't know enough about embryonic stem cell research to know whether they like it or not. They know what it's about. And depending on when you believe life begins, You either find it acceptable or you don't. It has nothing to do with the science, and as I said before, science can't tell you when life begins. So it's a values decision, and it's a moral decision whether to allow embryonic stem cell research. We'll come back if you want to that. So we are advocating a different strategy. I call it public understanding plus. Of course, people need to understand what's going on in the science, or you can't have a discussion about it. But you don't need the excruciating detail of embryonic stem cell research. It's not critical in order to have the conversation. What is critical is to have a communication that's multi-directional. And this will sound totally obvious to you who are here to have a multi-directional conversation, but I promise you that most scientists don't see the world this way. They see the world, you don't get it, I'm going to explain it to you, and then you'll see it my way, right? Because I'm smart, and right? And we are advocating this different approach. It involves the scientific community, but also the societal community listening to each other. We, in science, need to understand the public's concerns, their priorities, and I believe they should get to help shape the research community. The goals of this strategy are, of course, sharing the benefits of science, but looking to learn from society in the same way that society can learn from science. And, in fact, to seek common ground and common solutions. I will tell you that the first few times I started speaking about this, which, by the way, is very popular in Europe as an approach, it's been much less popular in the United States, I thought I was going to be lynched. But the truth is that every experiment that has ever been done in public engagement with science, this dialogue as opposed to unilogue, monologue, has been tremendously effective. The best example of it historically was when the Army Research Agency, decided to bring patients into the breast cancer grant review process. And you can imagine the scientific community went nuts. That's a technical term. They said, you know, what, are you crazy? Patients reviewing grants? Can't be. They learned a tremendous amount from the patients because they bring a different perspective. And the perspective has been very useful, and every experiment done in it has been tremendously effective. So what am I talking about? How do you do it? A variety of ways you can do it. Town meetings, big public forums, you can read as well as I. The thing that actually works best is that third bullet, to form little groups to work on the problem and look for common solutions. People don't really live at those extremes all the time. Most people are in the rational middle, you know, where you can, in fact, have conversations where people learn from each other. It's a weird concept, I know. And you can do it, but it's hard to do in a big group, of course. So we at AAAS have developed what I call a Glocal approach. Now, I want you to know I don't have a speech impediment. That's the only thing you'll remember from tonight's talk, is that word. It's a very good word. I love it. I actually got the word from the head of the Mexico City Science Museum. And I thought she did have a speech impediment. She had a very heavy accent. And she said, you know, oh, we are doing Glocal things. And I said, okay. The principle is simple: to take a global issue and make it meaningful at the local or individual level. People only care about things that affect them directly. That's the truth. And therefore, you can't talk about scientific concepts in very broad terms because they're not meaningful. So in an area like this, an increase in the number of floods has a whole lot more meaning than it does in suburban Washington, I can tell you. The reason is it's locally more meaningful. So we, AAAS, have been working at the local level in a variety of places. You can see the list of kinds of organizations. And again, we have found it to be a very effective approach. And again, IHMC, I know, has a whole array of engagement activities, outreach activities into this community that serve, I think, a tremendous function, not only in educating the community. I'm happy for the community to be educated, but it also is an opportunity for the Institute to learn from the community and become a part of it. The goal is not to convert people. That's the hardest thing for my scientific colleagues. It really isn't. It's to learn from each other and find common ground. So since the country has just gone through a rather large change, I thought I should close this talk with talking a little bit about what's going to happen. I've been talking mostly about what's been happening over the course of the last few years, and there has been a rather precipitous change in the country, and let's talk about it. It's interesting that every one of the key issues for the new administration has a major science and technology component. You can't restore the economy if you don't have innovation, right? And therefore, science is tied to it. Energy and environment, healthcare, national security, education at all levels. I promise not to give you my education speech yet again. And for us, President Obama has taken a very strong positive stand towards science, in contrast to some stands of the more recent past. He has declared they will invest in science and in university-based research and will restore scientific integrity to policymaking. I was in the room in the White House, by the way, when he announced that he would restore integrity to science. And for the first time in the 30 years I've been in Washington, the 100 scientists in the room started whooping and whistling and clapping. It was most disrespectful, but it was pretty cool, if I say so myself. Nancy Pelosi has gotten it, and as you may know, a very large piece of the stimulus package is going into science. And the funniest thing, not to make fun of, I like her very much, I think she's very smart, but she has this routine that I've now heard her do a number of times where she says it's about science, 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 science 4 times, and innovation. And that makes for a different leadership climate than we have had in the recent past. The stimulus bill, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, had $21.5 billion over 2 years for science. We won't have to go through the detail of it. And this is just to show you that virtually every federal agency wound up with a larger in black increase in the final congressional budget for fiscal 09 than the president requested for fiscal 09. It's a very, very dramatic effect. If you look out to 2010, I don't know if I'm supposed to show this graph because I stole it from the White House, but you won't tell them. So this shows that they're beginning to reverse that decline in research support. What's interesting about it is that it means that this new policy climate is going to provide a lot, mostly in the form of money and a promise to restore the integrity. It also puts tremendous pressure on the scientific community. So I have been railing at the scientific community that we had better not foul this up. All these years, we have had a defensive stance, you know. You didn't give us enough money. Now we have money. We're in very good financial shape. At least the federal agencies are in good financial shape. And the climate looks like it will be better. We better deliver. They love when I say that to them. Yeah. In truth, if we as a country are going to thrive across the rest of this century into the next, if our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren are going to thrive, we have got to have a balanced relationship. You want to see that? Do that again? I like making that do. These are very hard to do, these animations. They really are, and you are not appreciating them enough. Anyway, the truth is that unless the relationship between science and society is a smooth one with mutual understanding, mutual communication, and mutual benefit, it won't work. This quote from Abraham Lincoln is my favorite. Public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. It's the obligation of the scientific community and the rest of society to engage with each other and try to find common ground in the tough issues, but make sure that science serves society as fully as it can. Thank you. That's my baby picture. Okay, we're ready. My colleagues have microphones. The floor is open for questions. I'm sure I said something to inflame somebody. Yes, sir. Can you identify yourself?
Yes.
And then, so before we do this, can I just tell you, when I do this, I have one ground rule. I'm the speaker, you're the questioner.
That's right.
No speeches, questions.
Good.
Go ahead.
Good. I'm Bill Spain, and thank you for coming. To support your position concerning science and ordinary people dialoguing, I went to a stem cell conference at Berkeley 2 years ago, and these experts there were saying that the stem cells were spectacular at that point for acute injuries, but the public is believing that stem cells are good for chronic injuries. And so you're right on about the necessity. Now, from your position, is there any change from your perspective concerning stem cells for helping chronic injuries?
Depends on what you mean. So spinal cord injuries, there are data from rat studies that not embryonic stem cells, but adult stem cells have been used in some rat studies to, in fact, restore where spinal cords have been cut. But it's not restored to full functioning, but at least there's motor activity that happens. And it depends on what you mean by chronic, of course, but Parkinson's disease is a chronic illness, and there's no reason. If you could regrow the cells in the striatum, you ought to be able to make tremendous progress. Whether you could totally cure it, I don't know. And diabetes is a chronic illness. But those cures are really quite far out. And we don't know what kind of stem cell research will be the most productive in doing that. But I think all of us in the community do believe that stem cells that can be programmed to grow, whatever their origin, will in fact develop new therapeutics and new diagnostics that will revolutionize medicine and probably the treatment of chronic as well as acute disease. I think there was somebody up here.
First of all, since you didn't give me $1 million, I thought Einstein made that quote, not Pogo.
You know, I told you, it has to do with my classical education.
There you go.
I think it is Einstein, but I will tell you that it's attributed to Einstein. It's like, you know about the ancient, I'll be quiet in a minute, but you know about the ancient Chinese curse, you should live in interesting times? I've looked it up. There's no proof that that's an ancient Chinese curse. There isn't. I'm not the only person with a bad classical education. Go ahead. But it may have been Einstein.
Pogo's just as attractive. And one small comment and then a question. I didn't know if you know that we do actually in this town have one, I guess, I don't know if it's the only mini theme park that attributes dinosaurs to a biblical explanation. You should go.
I don't think I should.
Okay. In terms of personalized medicine and the advancement in those directions, right now economically, it looks like we're looking at some kind of public health care structure they're looking to reform, some kind of semi-socialized medicine. Right now we have a lot of, I'm in the tissue banking industry and I get to hear what everybody dies of, and a lot of people have no basic health care whatsoever. They don't even can afford checkups, let alone personalized medicine. If we put money into the reform of the health structure right now, isn't that going to cause some kind of de-investment, because capitalism kind of runs on that sense of motivation for the entrepreneurs to make money off this research? If we're investing money into the healthcare reform, is that going to slow down any advancements?
It's a great question. I don't know, obviously, but did everybody get the question? It's a great question. That is, with the change in our healthcare system, will it change the investment in research? Because it may not have the same profit outcomes as it would otherwise. I really don't know. The federal government provides the majority of research support for basic research, even in biomedical fields. So certainly up to the point and through what's called translational research, basic to clinical, but not all the clinical research, there will continue to be support. What industry will do, I don't know. Personally, I believe, but I can't prove this to you, that's why I use the word believe, I believe that personalized medicine will save money, that we will have many fewer instances of people getting treatments that don't have a chance of being effective for them because they're genetically non-responsive. I take hypertension medication. I had to try 5 different ones before I found one that worked. I did find one that worked. Why did it work for me, right? Well, it has to do with my genes and my ability to respond to that one and not some other one. Well, once we get there, we won't waste the money on the other 4. I hope. This is all hope. Yes, sir.
My name is Klaus Korb. My name is Klaus Korb, and I happen to be a scientist. I have a PhD in geology.
Good.
And as you hear from my accent, I'm originally from Europe. And having lived here for 25 years, I'm very deeply concerned about our educational system. And I had a granddaughter who had just graduated. She got her bachelor's degree in an honor college, 24 years old. And I must tell you, a bachelor degree here, a college degree, is no more than graduating from high school in Europe. You can pick every European country where you graduate with 18 years. There are 6 years wasted in our educational system, in my opinion.
Well, American education needs a whole lot of work. I have to tell you that my understanding of large portions of European education suggests that it has slid back as well. But the data from that slide show that virtually every European country is ahead of the United States in science and math, and that's pretty depressing. Yes, sir. Just turn it off.
How do you turn that off?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Jim Crumlish, and I have a very important question for you related to education. We are currently, across the state, looking at developing a chemistry in schools program, and this has to do with hazardous materials, and they want to bring kids up to a point where they will be involved in emergency planning and things of that sort. So what my question has to do with is, where do you start in the grade schools to get the most effective results?
I believe parents need to start. That's why we have this little ad that we ran. I believe that parents need to start exposing their kids to science preschool. Science is a part of every aspect of modern life. We don't have to have a 6-year-old understand the molecular structure of DNA. That isn't quite it. But certainly we don't want our children from any age to be growing up with a fear of science, a belief that science is for other people, not for them, and not just whether they'll become future scientists and engineers. You know, I love scientists and engineers, and I want everybody to be one, but not everybody needs to be one, but everyone needs not to be intimidated by science. It is inevitable. It is inevitable in modern life, and therefore we owe it to our children. And so the earlier, the better, you know. But I don't seem to be able to control it. Yeah, please.
Hello, my name is Joanne, and you mentioned that you had a 2.5-year-old grandchild.
You want to see?
Sure.
Just kidding. Don't worry, Ken.
We have a 3-year-old child, and I'm familiar with what we're talking about because my husband and I both lived in Europe for quite some time. But as a parent, do you have, or a grandparent, do you have any suggestions of any material or any access of what we could use to help interact them and so they could be stimulated at age-appropriate material, but yet...
Well, there are all kinds of toys, science-related toys for little kids. There are other museums that are scientifically accurate. You know, kids love museums, and their children's, every major science museum in the United States has a children's section, or natural history museums. And, you know, again, we're not trying to make them into scientists necessarily. We're trying to expose them to science and have them be comfortable with science and technology. But I'm not really an expert on. I'm not allowed to buy toys for my grandkids if I don't buy the right ones. They have to be edgy. And
time for 2 more questions.
Okay, 2 more, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sharon Barnett. It appeared to me that in your remarks that you indicated that mind-body dualism exists, and I'd like you to I'd like you to comment on that. And perhaps as you're discussing that, you could also comment on why you conclude that religion and science can exist in harmony, why you might think they occupy separate spheres.
Sure.
Because certainly many notable philosophers don't view it that way. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I don't believe in dualism. I have a sign in my office that says Descartes died. So you do not have a separate mind and a body. The mind is in the hard space on top of your shoulders. And again, that doesn't affect free will. That doesn't mean you don't have free will. It just means that your mind is located there and it's made up of the activity of things going on in, the mush. Science is about the nature of the natural world. That's what it's about. That's its limit. The National Academy of Sciences put out a very important report. It had to do particularly with evolution, but it was about the nature of science and about evolution. And they made very clear that religion is concerned with the supernatural and is not subjectable to scientific questions. Okay. But science has nothing to say about God. God is not a scientific question. So it can't be tested scientifically, and therefore they are in separate domains. There are many, many scientists who are deeply religious people, and many, 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 many deeply religious people have no discomfort with science at all. And so it is the extremes that are fostering this conflict between science and religion. And I don't think you can change their minds. I mean, Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist in England, is ridiculous. Here is a guy who says, he wrote a whole book about, non-God, science has disproved God. Well, Leon Lederman, Nobel laureate in physics, has a great line. His line is, before the Big Bang, it's all up for grabs. And, that sort of makes sense to me, right? Okay, I believe in the Big Bang. I believe that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. But what was before it? I don't think I know. And I'm not uncomfortable not knowing. And I argue the same about a whole variety of issues. There is no reason that science and religion can't live together comfortably Francis Collins, the guy who oversaw the Human Genome Project, is a born-again Christian. He's perfectly comfortable in that relationship. And I think when we see the conflict between science and religion, we need to be very careful that people don't have an ulterior motive. When they generate the conflict, I think an appropriate question is, what do you need that for? Why are you doing that? Because the majority of the scientific community doesn't see that conflict. And certainly the majority of the general public doesn't see the conflict. It's only the extremes who are having the problems with it. I'm sorry, that was a very long answer to a short question. Last one. Okay.
My name is Ken Dunn, and I would like to make a quick little statement here, and that is the fact that I just retired from 10 years in secondary and 20 years in college education. And I observed the decline of the student primarily as a result of the decline of the American family.
Could be.
Now, my question, sir. You mentioned, I believe the term was global climate disruption. Good term. And is it us or is it Mother Nature? And also, Pogo said, we have met the enemy and he is us. Remember?
So there is, again, 97% of the scientific community believes that we are doing it. Pretty tough to disagree with that. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the most detailed, most elaborate, most multinational analysis ever done, came up with the strongest statements ever made about climate. If we don't believe them, let's not pretend it's a scientific argument. It's something else. And if it's something else, so be it. But don't cloak it in science. That was a deep thought. All right, we did it.